Susanna Pauline Anaya has been a lifelong educator, teacher, counselor, and administrator. She is a descendant of the first families of New Mexico. I went with the English translation rather than murder it in my Spanish. And her descendants trace back to the beginning with the 1598 Onate expedition and Spanish settlements that followed. Educated in California and New Mexico, she was a founding member and officer of the New Mexico Hispanic Cultural Preservation League, a volunteer league of individuals who have worked to honor and promote the knowledge of the significant history of the Spanish contribution to the state and nation. She has been a member, a board member, and is now the president, as Ernestina Cordova mentioned, of the Juan Bautista de Anza International Society. This is a volunteer international group who promote the study of the times and life of Governor Anza, who contributed much to the settlements of the Spanish Southwest. Today, she's going to share a little bit of his history and impact upon the Southwest and New Mexico, where he was appointed a royal governor. And we are delighted that she could be with us today and share with us her knowledge and get us interested and excited about the conference that will be here in Taos, May 17th through 19th of next year. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker.
Buenos días a todos y gracias por esta gran invitación de la Sociedad de Historia de Taos. Es un placer de estar aquí. Mi esposo John Granado y yo estábamos bien nerviosos de vamos a venir a conocer y ver nuestros primos de Taos. But I want to thank you all for the invitation to your Historic Society's Christmas banquet and such a beautiful venue. My husband, John Granado, and myself were really excited about being here, so to be among many distinguished people. So thank you for the invitation. The Anza Society is a tax-exempt 501(c) nonprofit corporation that was incorporated in the state of Arizona. And its purpose, again, as Ernestina had mentioned, and Paul, I believe, was mentioned, that we celebrate the life and times of both Anzas, his father and he. They were both presidio capitanes of New Spain. Especially Junior, Juan Bautista de Anza II, who was our governor of New Mexico, was of course an explorer. He was a leader of the founders of San Francisco, California, which he's mostly known for. He's a peacemaker and of course governor of New Mexico. The activities included in our organization is celebrating this life. And we have an annual forum so that we can share results of our research. And we hold forums or conferences on both sides of the border in Mexico and here. I did bring some member applications for anyone who might be interested in joining our organization. John and I have been a part of it for about 7 years. And it has been really eye-opening for us. I'm an amateur historian. And yet, of course, knowing that my familia, my history has been here in New Mexico for 425 years, it behooved me to try to learn as much as I could the good, the bad, and the ugly of our history. And so joining the Anza Society was a real opportunity to get to know Nueva España, the Sonora part and the Mexican part that is part of the story. These activities include Anza's father, Juan Bautista de Anza, who was a Basque, born in Spain, and the Basque country in Spain is in the northwest area, which borders France. And he immigrated to Nueva España and settled in the Sonora area. And he eventually became a presidial capitan. These activities also include the study of 18th century Spanish colonial history. Let's see, do I do this one? Okay, got it. Thank you. So the Anza era, the study of the Anza era expands the 1700s in northern colonial Spain. Our conferences include presentations of scholarly papers, field trips, and reenactments of events that are presented by members and by guests. I must say our field trips are always very, very important, very fun. The Society, the AIS, are planning again this coming year our conference here in Taos. The membership and the board have been wanting to come to Taos for so many years. And we held our conference in Albuquerque and Santa Fe about 3-4 years ago. And even at that time, they were wanting to come to Taos. Well, we're finally coming, so everyone is excited. And of course, I have to thank Ernestina Cordova, the president of your group, who's really been helpful in assisting us get our plans forward. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about our plans before I end. If I can get this right. In 1776, while American patriots fought for their independence from England, Spanish Lieutenant Colonel John Bautista de Anza II led more than 240 men, women, and children, along with domesticated animals, all 1,800-mile trip to establish a settlement at San Francisco Bay. These families were the first colony to come overland across the frontier of the Pacific side of New Spain into present-day California. And that he's most known for. Anza's contemporaries on the eastern Atlantic side of the present-day USA are celebrated and well recognized as significant U.S. historical figures. The Anza story has not been highlighted nationally as the importance that it serves. This being so, it was a group of mostly transplanted Arizonians who took to celebrate and highlight the importance of Anza Senior and Junior, and their dedication and their contribution to the settlements. From Sonora to San Francisco, as well as Anza Junior's preservation of New Mexico's colony and the opening up of the future passage from east to west of the United States for trade, travel, and the ultimate settlement of the West. These few individuals, such as Don Garate, I don't know how any of you here have heard of Don or have seen his reenactments, but Don Garate, and there's Joe and Sharon Myers, Rosalie Wright, Phil Valdez, and a group of others, working and living in the Tucson area, appreciated Anza's talents and contributions to a right for those of his place and time, and the positive aspects for both countries. And so they continue to this day to work on that through our society. And I would like to just recognize Donald Garate, who himself of Basque descent, born in 1950 in Northern California. And he worked on the first half of his life on a cattle ranch in Northern California. He took a bachelor's degree, and then he worked his way down to the Tucson area, and he worked for Spanish historical mission sites as an interpreter and research historian for the National Park Service. There he was able to expand his passion and his gift for researching and recording history. He was married and had 5 daughters and 2 sons. And Don Garate wrote and published 24 historical books, of which 6 were unpublished, and some numerous historical articles. He was fluent in English, Spanish, and Basque. He researched and he wrote the book on Juan Bautista Anza I, who was born in 1693 in Spain, and he died in 1740. It was in 1992 that Garate and Richard Williams founded what is the Arizona Coalition, the Anza Coalition of Arizona, which today is now known as the National Anza Park Trail, which gave the official federal government gave recognition from the federal government and funds from the government to preserve and expand the trail and the knowledge of the Anza era in Arizona and California. Soon, Don Garate worked with a group of volunteers to establish this organization, which is the Juan Bautista Anza International Society. And we're pleased that it has still existed because it is a group of volunteers. And Don Garate dedicated his life to advance the positive contributions of the Spanish provincial era, as well as the Anza era. And he worked years to get his dream of a video and a film reenactment about Anza and the 1775 Anza expedition on film and video, because he knew that the multimedia today is so needed in order to educate. So he was successful in finally getting the National Park Service to support the idea. And of course, Don, as a reenactor of Anza, would be the perfect Anza actor, as he had done many reenactments over his career, and he had very closely embodied the Anza persona in the spirit. So I'd like to show you this 22-minute scholarly documentary by the National Park Service. It holds the highest quality of information, so those who view it will quickly get the importance of the expedition and the flavor of the times and life of those involved. I personally am most grateful for Don's sacrifice and contribution, which promoted the positive contributions of Spain to the Southwest and the whole of America. Thank you. I'm just getting over this cough. So. A little bit here. Okay, good. All right, thank you. So, Don, who was not able to finish the film due to his cancer, he died in September of 2010. But through this film, you will no doubt appreciate his efforts and his acting as a means to learn in a very short time the legacy of Anza. So I'd like to show you this film.
Chairman of the House Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands. On August 15, 1990, the United States Congress commemorated the endurance and sacrifice of the men, women, and children who participated in the 1775 Anza expedition and the founding of the city of San Francisco. Under the auspices of the National Park Service, the route the colonists traveled in the United States from Tubac, Arizona to San Francisco, California was designated the Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail. This is the story of those intrepid colonists.
Imagine taking your family across 1,800 miles of wilderness to start a new life, daunted by the unknown, to go beyond the borders of their own civilization and through lands where others feared to venture. In 1775, a group of about 300 people agreed to take such a journey despite prominent hardships. Their success depended upon cooperation, perseverance, strong leadership, and the unanticipated kindness of native peoples they would meet along the way. The legacy of these courageous people is found today along the Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail. In the late 1700s, Spain had a major foothold in southwestern North America. This new Spain was struggling to secure outposts in Alta California against Russian and English colonization. The Spanish needed to establish a settlement at San Francisco Bay to secure their northernmost frontier. But ships had limited space for transporting large numbers of people, livestock, and supplies, and the Pacific coast was treacherous. An overland route from Sonora to Alta California was desperately needed. Captain Juan Bautista de Anza pursued this challenge.
My surname is Anza. It's not De Anza, as some people who are not familiar with the last name sometimes call me. I was born in 1736 near the Fronteras Presidio, or the fort in Sonora. My father was born in Spain. He was of Basque descent. I am labeled a Criollo, a Spaniard who was born outside of Spain. I am a Presidio soldier, as my father was before me, and I have been serving to protect our northern missions, trade routes, and communities since I was 15. I am married to Ana Maria Perez Serrano, but sadly, we have no children. When I began to contemplate this expedition to the northwestern frontier, most of the route was unknown to me. I needed to travel corridor of guaranteed water for many people and livestock through the deserts along the way. I knew parts of this harsh land and its challenges, and found an appropriate route on an exploratory trip in 1774. The king, Carlos III, through his viceroy in Mexico City, gave me final authorization for a colonizing expedition. As we prepare to depart on this mission, I am 39 years old.
There are no written records of what Anza looked like or his physical appearance. But we believe he must have been an inspiring figure in both intellect and stature. Anza recruited married soldiers with families with the idea that they would immediately form a colony at the new outpost called San Francisco. The 200 colonists consisted of 30 families, 42 men, 39 women, and 119 children. Most were poor, and many recruited from Culiacan in northern New Spain. The oldest man was 47, and the oldest woman 45. When promised salary, rations, gear, 3 sets of new clothing, and land, most saw this arduous trek as an opportunity to improve not only their lives, but also their position in society. The colonists were a surprisingly diverse mixed people of Spanish, African, and Native American descent, representing various ethnic groups or castes in the Spanish social order. 30% had African bloodlines. Also accompanying the colonists were escort soldiers, muleteers, cowboys, workers, servants, and blacksmiths. Altogether, 300 people traveled across unfamiliar and inhospitable territory for a new and better life.
The final gathering of people, livestock, and provisions took place at Tubac. We departed on October 23rd, 1775. I gave the order to load up with the command, Vayan subiendo, get mounted. It took more than 2 hours to get started. With so many people, there is much delay, and it is no small labor to break count. This will be our daily routine. The scouts head out first to determine the route. I lead the group. And Father Font follows singing the morning Alabado, or the hymn of praise. Behind come the colonists with soldier escorts,
Adelantamos a Rio San Francisco.
followed by the mule train, with herd horses and cattle in the rear. We make our way along a wide corridor of land, over routes and trails that Indians had long used for travel and trade. And we are quite a sight, a fully equipped, mile-long, quarter-mile-wide traveling city.
3 Franciscan priests, Francisco Garces, Tomás Aishark, and Pedro Font, accompanied Captain Anza and his 2 main officers, Lieutenant Jose Joaquin Moraga and Sergeant Juan Pablo Grijalva. Anza, Font, and Garces all kept diaries that have been insightful to our knowledge of the events on the trail. Font was the expedition's appointed chaplain, and all his journals have been especially informative due to his meticulous nature and role as navigator. He used an astrolabe to read latitudes. Font and Anza often disagreed and appeared to have had a general dislike for each other.
I must confess the little benevolence I have for Captain Anza. I find him arrogant and prone to worldly devices. He even accuses me of interfering in everything. Father Garces, however, finds Anza extremely tolerant, patient, generous, and well liked by the Indians, and sees in him a great fund of discretion to meet any unforeseen emergency. I do not.
I have many reservations about this journey. I am one of 8 women who were pregnant when we set out. At La Canoa, our first camp north of Tubac, my friend Manuela Piñuelas went into labor. She gave birth to a fine boy, Juan Capistrano. But sadly, she died that night. We stopped at Mission San Javier del Bac 2 days later to mourn the death of Manuela and to celebrate 3 marriages of our fellow travelers. I pray I survive the birth of my baby. In the meantime, it's very difficult keeping track of the rest of my children among these hundreds of people. At least they have other children to play with.
Mama, I'm hungry. Why do we eat the same food every day?
We are grateful that Captain Anza planned thoughtfully for all our needs. He supplied some 1,000 head of livestock for riding, packing, and eating, including about 200 mules, 500 horses, 28 donkeys, and 300 head of cattle. Each day, over 7 tons of provisions are loaded and unloaded from pack mules. There are no wagons or carts, as there are no roads. We prepare meals with flour, beans, chili, cornmeal, beef jerky, and we make a special drink with sugar and chocolate. The cattle are not just to stock our new colony, but also for fresh meat to eat along the way. The children and I usually sleep outside because we are sharing 10 tents among 30 families. With not enough riding animals for every person in the expedition, we often share our mounts with 1 or more of our children. Or we walk and walk and walk.
I understand the importance of building good relations with the many natives.
AA batteries.
don't have the delays in your
Did you see Mark?
Yeah, these things drain batteries quick.
Really fast, yeah. And I'll know better next time. Super duper thing. We needed a break anyhow. We need future food.
As we're encountering along our journey, for this reason I have issued a proclamation making known the penalties imposed on anyone who should attempt to steal their goods or violate their women. I forbid anyone to raise arms against them except in a case of necessity for the defense of life. On one occasion, 4 cattle were stolen, and I sent out soldiers to recover them with specific instructions not to harm the natives or to seek retribution, but only to deliver a warning. To the credit of all, my orders have been followed.
At the crossing of the Colorado River near present-day Yuma, Ansa was greeted by a Quechua native who he called Chief Palma, leader of a local village who he had first met on a reconnaissance trip the year before. When Ansa's caravan approached the village, Palma greeted them and brought Ansa and his followers to meet his people. The Quechua invited the expedition to share their bounty of food. The colonists ate their first fresh food in months, which included beans, squash, watermelons, fish, corn, wheat, and other grains. The feast was a welcome change from their monotonous staple provisions. The Quechua natives were good swimmers, while the colonists were not. Hundreds of Quechua helped the expedition cross the 4-foot-deep frigid river without mishap. Font estimated that he had seen some 3,000 Quechua in the surrounding villages. Fathers Garces and Aishart remained with the Quechua at the crossing. Aishart helped to found a new mission, while Garces set out south and southwest to the mouth of the Colorado River. He then traveled northwest to explore the San Joaquin Valley, and finally eastward to the Grand Canyon and Hopi villages in northern Arizona.
When we left the Colorado River crossing, we faced the most challenging part of our journey. The vast desert we entered offered little water. We did carry a few days' supply for ourselves, but our livestock needed water in abundance. I devised a plan to get our people and livestock safely across the desert. We divided into 4 groups. 3 groups of colonists traveled one day apart southwest across the vast sand dunes. I sent men ahead to dig holes in the dry washes so the wells would fill with water before the rest of the group arrived. Vaqueros driving the livestock made up the fourth group, and they traveled a more direct route, sometimes moving 2 days without water for the livestock.
ANSA's decision to divide the colonists into 3 groups was practical. We made it across the desert. Unfortunately, we were greeted on the other side with a fierce December snowstorm. We were held up for 4 days and 5 nights, with only a few tents. Most of us huddled under makeshift shelters of blankets and brush. Firewood was scarce, and some livestock, weakened by poor feed and exhaustion, collapsed and froze to death. It was a gruesome sight. Eventually, the storm passed, and against my wishes, ANSA distributed some aguardiente to supposedly raise their spirits. The people spontaneously held a fandango or party. Such behavior does not serve the spiritual needs of these people.
After crossing the desert and leaving the snow, the colonists felt the tremors of one of California's first recorded earthquakes. Then, like a miracle, the parched desert gave way to fertile soils, abundant water, and lush vegetation. Streams and rivers flowed everywhere. Daily, fresh fish replaced dried beef jerky. Never had these people seen such abundance. They entered a land bountiful beyond all expectations as they approached the place now called Los Angeles and arrived at Mission San Gabriel on January 4, 1776.
This is the first civilized place we have seen in 3 months. Most of my soldiers and I went to San Diego to put down a native uprising. It is clear that Mission San Gabriel is not prepared for the extra miles to feed. After traveling for so long, hidden tensions are beginning to show. 4 men deserted the day before my arrival back from San Diego. It took 25 horses and 2 mules. Moraga and 10 soldiers tracked them down and caught on the expedition at Mission San Antonio on March the 7th. The deserters were sentenced to hard labor, and some would help build the Presidio in San Francisco. We are now preparing for the last leg of our journey. After leaving Mission San Gabriel, we traveled some 75 miles before seeing the California coast at what is now Carpinteria. Here we encountered the Chumash, who excelled in fishing boat building. We still have some 250 miles of coast to be traveled before arriving in Monterrey.
18 days after leaving San Gabriel, the expedition arrived in Monterrey, the most northern Spanish settlement in Alta California, less than 100 miles south of San Francisco Bay. They made it, almost. The colonists remained in Monterrey while ANSA set out to explore the Bay Area. On March 28, 1776, ANSA and a small party stood on a bluff overlooking the majestic bay. It was this site that ANSA selected for the new colony.
Although in my travels, I saw very good sights and beautiful country, I saw nothing which pleased me so much as this. And I think that if well settled, like Europe, there would be nothing more beautiful in all of the world.
ANSA accomplished his mission. He delivered the colonists, more than doubling the number of Spaniards in Alta California. Only Manuela Pinuelas died on the journey, and that as a result of childbirth. Leaving the colonists in Moraga's care, ANSA returned to Sonora and reported the success of the expedition to the Viceroy in New Spain. Font died in September 1781 at Mission Tubutama and is buried at Mission Pitiquito in Sonora. Garces was killed in Yuma during a native uprising in 1781. Moraga died in 1785 in San Jose and was laid to rest at the mission in San Francisco 5 years later. ANSA lived up to its promise to lead the soldier settlers to this far, isolated, and beautiful land. As a reward, he was made the governor faith for 10 years. He died in 1788 at age 52 and is buried beneath the floor of a side chapel in Mission Arizpe in Sonora. San Francisco was founded by a determined group of multi-ethnic adventurers who worked together in a spirit of cooperation and perseverance to form a new society under the Spanish flag.
As a son of an immigrant, I understand the spirit of adventure and hope for a better life that motivated these families to embark in such a journey. I celebrate their achievement. Furthermore, I am humbled by the rich heritage, a heritage that speaks of fortitude and purpose, and a heritage shared by all Americans.
Viva San Francisco, or as I say in my native Basque language, Gora Gora San Francisco.
To learn more about the Anza expedition, visit the following websites.
Thank you all. I also would like to mention that Anza then continues on to New Mexico after this. And the story, I would love to see the story from his arrival here in New Mexico and his 10 years of tenure here also be on a film sometime to complete the story. Once he returned from California, he traveled to Mexico City. And they said that he sat at a studio for an artist who tried to capture him on canvas, the nature of this frontiersman of Basque heritage. And this is the portrait picture that was used by Dr. Carlos Herrera. Dr. Herrera did his doctoral dissertation out of the University of New Mexico on Anza in New Mexico. So he did a wonderful study, a wonderful work to capture the story of Anza in New Mexico. And this is his book. And Dr. Herrera has been gracious to host us when we had our last year's conference in Calexico. And so he helped us there in Calexico. He also, when we had our conference here in Pueblo, Colorado, 3 years ago, he also was a speaker. But this is his book. And this is where I took much of my information about Anza in New Mexico. That once he, this portrait of Anza was used on his book, and they say, well, good, we have a picture of what he looked like. Well, it happens that in 1970, the Anza family donated this portrait that was supposedly painted in Mexico City to the Museum of New Mexico. And there was some controversy saying that they did not believe that this was really his image. And so they had it, I guess, date analyzed. And they said that the analysis showed that this portrait was actually painted about 100 years after on, so it really wasn't his. So although they have this hanging in the museum in New Mexico, and it's used widely, they still say they don't really know that it is his image. It was on August the 24th of 1777, King Carlos III, through the Viceroy in Mexico, needed to assign a man with the skills and the character that Anza developed, and one who would be of faithful service to the crown. So the crown, knowing and learning of Anza, appointed Anza as governor of New Mexico. And at that time, the territory represents not present-day New Mexico, but also the lands in eastern Arizona, southern Colorado, southwestern Kansas, the Oklahoma Panhandle, and western Texas. New Mexico was a really a peripheral frontier colony, and it had a degree of autonomy of its own. That was really necessary in order for this society to survive. It was so far from Mexico City. You figure that New Mexico, Santa Fe is about as far from Mexico City as it is from Washington, D.C. It's really far. There was a difference in governance here in New Mexico if it was going to survive. And when Anza arrived, the decade before was one of intense scarcity of resources. There had been a drought, and a colony was really at war among all those that were occupying this territory. The area surrounding Taos was a great concern as the increased raids by the Comanches. Raids from Comanches started in about 1730. And by this time, the raids had continued to not to cease, but to increase, even though the Comanches had been extended the opportunity for trade at the trades fairs that Taos held. Estado held the trades, and they would come and trade, but then they would begin their raiding again. So life was at risk, and survival of this northernmost outpost was really most threatened. And for Spain, the cost of defending an empire, however strained the resources and economy of Spain was, it wanted to try to defend its holding against many of the other European states that were in pursuit of their own claims on the Americas. So at this point, Spain was was on its decline. New Mexico was never able to generate capital for Spain, and it depended on the subsidies from Mexico City for its survival. But New Mexico's strategic location was a defensive buffer against the Indian attacks and the foreign intruders coming in from the north and the east. But in the 1700s, the regional military could not stop the growing tide of the Apache and the Comanche raids, and Anza was appointed to introduce reforms that would bring the frontier colony and the isolated missionary frontier into more of an active contributor to New Spain's general welfare. Here I go again. The Crown wanted to integrate it politically, economically, and socially within its imperial structure. But New Mexico had evolved since the Habsburg crown in 1598, and now it was under the Bourbon rule. So the settlement needed to be updated so that it could come in line and start to reflect the social, political, and social reforms that were wanted. I have to get a cough drop. Hang on just a second. In coming to New Mexico, Anza was aware of many challenges that he would face, especially in this northern territory that needed immediate attention. Anza, having spent his life on the frontier of Sonora in northern Spain, knew of the oppositions and the challenges that would be faced. The diverse populations that encountered harsh daily living with limited resources available created a hostile environment. The advantages and the pitfalls to be faced in New Mexico, for one, was with the stronghold that the Franciscans held in this region since its founding. The population had been expected to give a tithe and to work the lands as contribution. And Anza felt this was in extreme, and he wanted to limit this practice. Soon after arrival, he knew that he had to address the raiding threats, and so he rode into battle against the Comanches. He put together a punitive expedition out of Santa Fe in August of 1777, shortly after he arrived. He brought together about 600 soldiers and marched up from Santa Fe all the way up through to Española. And right about when you get to the entrance of Española, see the turnoff where you can go across the Rio Grande, and that's where he turned off with his 600 soldiers and about 1,600 horses. Each one of them had a horse, a fresh horse for themselves. And so he went along the west bank of the Rio Grande, and let me see if this pointer works. Whoops. Well, you can see the route, and the purple arrows are the arrows, and then the route shows that he came on the west side of the Rio Grande, on the foot of the San Juan Mountains, and worked his way up to Colorado. And when he reached up into Colorado, he met with about 200 Utes and Apache allies who encountered him. So they wound up to be about 800. They wanted to go, they went north through I guess it was San Luis Valley, into the Great Plains of Manitou Springs, Colorado, circling El Capitan, where he surprised a small group of Comanches. Right up here it says First Comanche Battle, up in there. And he surprised that small group that had just returned from a raid. And some of them escaped, and they said that he allowed them to escape so that they could, I guess, notify others that they were coming and they were serious and they were going to put a stop to this. But and that was near Colorado Springs. And then he pursued them down past Fountain Creek, and he crossed the Arkansas River, now the present-day Pueblo, Colorado. And then beyond that, he found the main body of the Comanches on what's called Greenhorn Creek, also returning from a raid on New Mexico. And at that point, he won a decisive victory, killing Cuerno Verde, which was Cuerno Verde Jr., and Cuerno Verde Jr.'s son, and several other of the war chiefs with him. And at that time, he also retrieved about 500 horses. And they said that he, at that battle, allowed the children and women to escape, and just as evidence of his mercy and tolerance, and that what he's really hoping for was that they would stop the raiding. And in that battle, Anza had only one Spanish soldier that was killed in the battle, which happened to be my ancestor, Francisco Domingo Anaya. And so his brother, Jose Antonio, was born in 1750, enlisted in order to replace his brother. He did that just a few days after. Two Anza founder, also what Anza found was a route from Santa Fe to Sonora, west of the Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, in the southern part of the state. His other local expeditions were usually successful. He did run into some difficulties with other natives who had been peaceful, but then decided to continue to revolt and not adhere to the treaties that they had initially set with Anza. And he said that toward the end of his time here, that he fell out of favor with one of the military commanders in the northern part of the frontier, which created a lot of problems for him. They reporting him to the crown and to the viceroy, saying that he wasn't doing what he should be doing. And eventually that was disputed. But it took about 8 more years before the Comanches would finally jointly agree to make peace with Anza. He refused to make peace with them if they didn't all come to the table together. He said he wanted to have one representative who would speak for all of them before he would sit down and actually sign the treaty. And it took them, they said, about 8 years, because they kept thinking that he was going to change his ways of being. And also they were thinking that he would be sent someplace else and a new governor would come in, and then they could just continue on the way they had. And And that not being so, and at this time they found themselves also, with those limited resources, they were having a really hard time surviving. So it was on February 28th of 1786 that the treaty among the Comanches was signed at Picuris, Pueblo. As the colonial overseer of the imperial politics of the Bourbon, what was called the reforms that were desired here were called the Bourbon absolutism reforms. And he did implement those. The bureaucracy, the judicial system, and the religious institutions, he worked hard to change. He was a man who really worked for cooperation among everyone. He was charged with militarizing the colonies so that it contributed to the maintenance of the empire. He needed the military, the citizen military, to join and to support the efforts of the state. And so the measures he implemented were uniforms that looked official, and he wanted fairness in the way they were being paid. And for example, the leaders of some of the military, if a man would die or he would be killed, they would report it to the viceroy, and they would continue to collect the monies of that person, and he would have that extra money. They would have that extra money. So there were things that he really stopped. He was more than explorer and devoted to he was devoted to the Spanish Empire and to the North American region that he knew intimately, which certainly shaped the history of New Mexico at a very critical juncture in order for the state and the community to continue, and also for it to be maintained within the colony. Anza did not live to see the long-term effects that his reformist administration had on the New Mexico colony. The defensive reforms Anza initiated, especially the emphasis he had placed on the use of citizen militias and Indian allies, continued to form the backbone of the New Mexico defenses to the very end of the Mexican period. The Comanche peace initiated after the treaties for peace among the treaty, it really helped generate peace treaties among the Navajos, Pueblos forging Spanish alliances, and it demonstrated that the perseverance of the human life in this very demanding environment depended on the willingness of all its inhabitants to extend a hand of cooperation across this whole desert landscape, and one that Anza himself embodied and demonstrated. So administratively, he had improved the efficiency of both the bureaucratic and the communicative processes, and the Anza subjugation of the Franciscans to the will of the state. At that time, he saw that there were 30 missions, and that the Franciscans were wanting the people to work to support them. He made them limit themselves. And the 30 missions they consolidated to 20 missions. Therefore, the people weren't having to work as hard to maintain them. After his 9 years of hard work in New Mexico territory, Anza was reassigned as commander of the Tubac Presidio in Sonora, back to his home area. The years of arduous service and loyal service, however, had taken its toll. Someone told me that, I think it was Joe Myers who said that in looking at all of his campaigns and all of his horseback expeditions, that in his lifetime he was on horseback for 50,000 miles. It's a lot of miles. So the journey back to Sonora, however, proved a difficult undertaking for Anza. He seemed to be lumbering along rugged terrain toward Arispe, his home, and arrived at that capital worn of body and spirit. Anza's health deteriorated throughout 1788. So, arriving in Arispe in January 1788, by the 20th of December, he was administered confession by Father Gonzalez and the last rites, but he died before he could receive communion. He was buried in the floor of a side chapel at Mission Nuestra Señora de la Asunción. Well, one of the things that the Anza Society is supporting is a project called the Anza Cuerno Verde Legacy Project of northern New Mexico and southern Colorado. The purpose is for us to create, among those interested in southern Colorado and northern New Mexico corridor, an advocacy for this important history in the form of a Anza Cuerno Verde historical trail. It would also encourage tourism and educational activities to these communities of the area. And Bob DeWitt and John Anderson of Pueblo, Colorado and Colorado Springs are spearheading this effort. They belong to other historic groups in their area, and I know they're pushing to try to get groups who might be, individuals who might be interested, so that we can actually seek some funds, perhaps from local governments, state, and maybe ultimately federal government, so that we could actually implement and have a historic trail in this area. So I want to let you know about that. Our conference is scheduled for May. We will be staying at the Sagebrush Inn. We usually have a Thursday evening registration, usually about 5:30, and light hors d'oeuvres and people getting to know each other. And our itinerary is sent out. We usually have a field trip on Friday, and then on Saturday we have our conference presentations. But this year, because of what transportation looks like for us, it looks like we're going to be doing our field trips on Friday instead. And Saturday we'll have our workshop and presentations. And so probably from about 8:30 to 4 o'clock. Then we have a dinner each of the nights. On Friday evening we have a dinner with the speaker, and on Thursday, Friday, and then on Saturday evening also. So that's generally what we have. I know in the past I've been a member for 7 years of Anza Society, and we've had wonderful experiences. The field trips are so valuable because you actually go to these sites and you look and you see the places that Anza was, and you get a feel for the area and his history. It was 3 years ago, we were in Los Alamos in Sonora. In Alamos, it's a beautiful historic Spanish colonial town that is on the list of the historic preservation places. It's a lovely town. There's tunnels underneath the town that were the reason they made the tunnels because of the silver, the great silver discovery in that area, and they would transfer silver underneath to the banks, and it goes right into the banks. So, and the people that had some of the nice homes there would take their silver and deposit it in the bank underneath the tunnels. So there's just a lot of stories there, and very, very interesting. Let's see, one last thing. Our board of directors, we have Sharon and Joe Myers. They have been with the Anza Society since Don and them got together to create this, and they're in Arizona. Jim Taves, who's from Alamos in Sonora, Mexico, will be the next president. Ron Quinn, Washington State. So we have people from all over, and it's just a fun group, and it's been really delightful to be a part of it. I think that's what I needed to say today. Thank you so much. One of the things that I wanted to bring this book. It's called Tree of Hate. And what this is, it's called The Propaganda of the Prejudices Affecting United States Relations with Hispanic America. And this book is a wonderful book. Robert Hendrick, Dr. Hendrick is from the History Department at the University of New Mexico, and he really recommended this. And it was Philip Wayne Powell who wrote this research, and he was a historian out of the University of California, Santa Barbara. And it's an excellent read. So I'm going to donate this book to the History Society.